All right, so the Dark Mountain project sounds more like something from Lord of the Rings, but it's not, I assure you. What is the Dark Mountain project, Dark Mountain Civilization, Dark Mountain Manifesto? What are you trying to say, and why do you say it in the way that you do?
Well, the Dark Mountain project started in 2009 with something called the Uncivilization Manifesto, written by two English writers, Paul Kingsnorth and Dougal Hine. And it was a kind of clarion call in the, I guess, sort of environmental landscape of the time for writing an art that looked honestly at the state we're in, the times we're in, the crises we're in, and just ask the question: how do we, as humans, respond to this? How do we feel? What does it do to us on a kind of soul level? Although it didn't really use those terms. Um, it wasn't about looking for solutions. In fact, it was sort of set itself quite against the idea of finding solutions, just on the principle that maybe we just don't know how to get out of this hole we're in. Um, the image of the mountain itself comes from a poem by Robinson Jeffers, um, and it's really the way I see it. It's about just walking away, not retreating, not withdrawing, but just stepping back a bit to try and take a longer view of the situation we're in on a global level, and see what happens if we confront honestly some of the stuff that's going on. So that was the kind of challenge of the manifesto. And when I say manifesto, it wasn't a political manifesto. It was very much in the style of kind of an old school literary manifesto. Um, and I found it an incredibly exciting document. It seemed to put into words something that I'd been feeling without really knowing how to express, or maybe not even knowing I was feeling it. But just a call for, like, yes, why isn't culture responding to ecocide, climate change, mass extinction, all of these other unravelings that we're all kind of quietly aware of, but didn't seem to be um, merited as sort of worthy of discussion by the sort of public intellectuals of the time. Um, so from that has emerged a series of journals. We're just about to publish our 30th book. I've now become much more involved, having gone from a kind of someone that just contributed because I was inspired by that call, to an editor and now co-director of the project. So the books are our kind of mainstay, and have been for the last decade and more. But around that, there's grown a sort of we don't like to say movement, but there's definitely a network, kind of organization of people um, in countries around the world. It started in the UK, but now many people from North America, people from India, Australia, New Zealand, different European countries. So we're all sort of loosely in touch through the medium of these journals and the website. So it's a kind of free flowing creative conversation that I think, and maybe we'll get into this a bit later, has really enabled people to look honestly at yeah, how they feel as humans in these darkening times.
Like the way that we're looking at the future, I'm just gonna paraphrase, but the way that we're looking at the future and what we're calling like solutions are not really solutions. The way that we're thinking about all these problems is maybe not the right way to think about it. Maybe there's just no solution. Maybe there's like we just did this and we can't get out of it. So there's a large cohort of people that exist right now that would say, well, we'll just add technology to this. We'll figure it out with technology. I used to be one of those people. And that's not the issue. But that's technology is not always the solution. In fact, technology is usually iatrogenic. Like it's a problem that it's a solution that causes another problem. So it's not really a solution. But can we just say a little bit more? Why is technology not the answer? It seems like the easiest thing to solve climate change. Okay, well, to solve like the plastic in the oceans and all of that, we'll create like large machines that capture all the plastic. To solve the carbon in the atmosphere, we'll create these carbon capture machines. Like what? But this is not getting to what we're talking about. Why is technology not the solution?
I think there's a kind of forced dichotomy sometimes between, these sort of poles of kind of loads of tech and no tech. Dark Mountain, we only exist because of the internet. That's how we all found each other. That's how we communicate. Like everyone else. So we're not kind of anti-technology per se. And technology obviously can be a solution to some things. Kind of there's better and worse ways of of making products, and some of them are cleaner, some of them are dirtier. So technology can be the solution to some things, but what we want to dig down into is there's a kind of much deeper problem lurking at the heart of all this, that I think, in simple terms, comes from the profound disconnection that we have I'd say as a species, but it's more correct to say as a kind of industrialized culture, the global industrialized culture. A disconnection from our origins, from the fact that we're animals living, in as part of an ecosystem, and technology can't solve that stuff. It's only adding more and more complex layers on top of it. So I think, yeah, that is the real issue. Maybe it's not even correct to say we need to find a solution to that. I think in kind of Western culture, we're very habituated to the idea that there are problems and each problem must have a solution. And I know all the kind of Silicon Valley people, see climate change, for example, as an engineering problem that will have an engineering solution. But that doesn't touch the sides of the kind of alienation that we have developed over, however many thousands of years. And I think that's what the real problem is. And I honestly couldn't say there is a solution to that. I mean, there's things that can kind of alleviate it, things that I personally, aim for or try to aim for. But some things can't necessarily be fixed. And I think that's the really challenging, radical thing about Dark Mountain's message, and the thing that some people have responded very badly to, because it sounds like giving up. If you say you can't fix something, it sounds like nihilism, rather than recognizing that we exist on a damaged planet. We are damaged as a culture, or various cultures, in so many different ways. Things can't necessarily be healed and put back the way they were, but there can be better and worse iterations of the future.
On this point, when you're writing about the Aral Sea disappearing, that's something that we can't get back. But what do we do with that? It sounds like a stupid question, but we're writing about something that's disappearing, or maybe completely disappeared, but in its current form. But it's not something that we can just like get a whole bunch of water and it's not like a pool, right? That we can just redo in the summer. But we write about it to document it. You're not writing about it in kind of like a sanctimonious way. What are we doing when we're kind of writing about this? What is your emotional state?
Oh, that's a really good question. It's a very interesting question, with the example of the Aral Sea. And just for people that don't know, it's technically an inland lake that until the 1960s was the fifth biggest body of water in the world, between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, fifth biggest inland body of water in the world, and has now all but disappeared due to kind of disastrous Soviet mismanagement of water resources, stopping the rivers that fed the sea from flowing. They were diverted into cotton plantations, and the world looked on, and satellites looked on, as this great body of water shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And now there's a sort of toxic sliver of it left. It's almost lifeless. And the entire fishing culture and way of life of a whole region has disappeared. So I was there 2 years ago, um, following a book that I've been writing about disappearing, vanishing landscapes. And when I got there, it was the first thing I thought, and kind of selfishly as a writer, I'd come there to kind of get a story essentially, was what on earth can I say that couldn't be summed up in a paragraph, which is this is awful. What a apocalyptic mess. Um, it's devastating. And beyond that, it was kind of hard initially to think of anything to say about it. The more I looked into it, the more sort of complex my thoughts about the Aral Sea were. And it's interesting with this kind of idea of technology, because in the north, the Uzbekistani portion of the sea has almost completely vanished, and I think there's no hope for it. It is going to disappear within a couple of decades completely, leaving the world's youngest desert, the Aral Kum. But in the north, in Kazakhstan, they've actually succeeded in bringing quite a lot of the water back. And they've done that, through technology. They've built a dam in the right place that's trapped enough water that now the water level is going up. Fish stocks are regenerating, and there's a fishing culture that is kind of quite resurgent in that part of the sea. That's not possible for various, sort of complex geological reasons in the Aral part of the sea. From what I know, that's kind of that's going to go. But you could look at that, yeah, and say, well, okay, a judicious application of technology is exactly what we need. What I found, the thing that really fascinated me was, so Dark Mountain tries to sort of steer a course between hope and despair. So with the Aral Sea, you could look at the northern portion of the sea and say that's hope, that's the water coming back. You could look at the desert that's now in place of the seabed in the south and say that's despair. But the reality was much more complicated. There were whole portions, swathes of this new desert that are turning green, mostly with a shrub called saxaul, which is spreading across the seabed, thrives in arid, salty conditions, and is transforming it into greenery of a kind. There's herds of the Saiga antelope, which have these amazing kind of fleshy trunk-like noses, and were critically endangered. Now I think they're doing a bit better, but they've actually been using what's now the seabed to migrate from Kazakhstan back to Uzbekistan. And there's people are carrying on. They're still finding ways to make a living. One of the sort of striking images of collapse was seeing these sons or grandsons of the last fishermen of the Aral Sea in Uzbekistan have diversified into harvesting the cysts or the eggs of sea monkeys or brine shrimp. They're about the only thing that can survive in the Aral Sea now, in the southern part. And so there's a whole kind of new economy, and I guess a sort of lifestyle that goes with that is developing. It's not enough to kind of say, oh, that's hopeful. It's a hopeful story. And I think one of the challenges with this book that I've been writing is trying to evade the editorial pressure that can come to kind of flatten everything into, well, let's have a happy kind of note of happiness at the end. Where's you need a little bit of hope at the end. But I've been trying to sort of tack between these poles of hope and despair and show how entangled they are.
In my mind, it's kind of like a heartbeat. Like there's a little bit of hope, a little bit of despair, a little bit of hopeful despair. There's hope that the water can come back. There's despair that the sea will never be the same again. There's hope and hopeful despair and some type of cosmic beauty that the Mother Earth, Mother Gaia can just revive in this way and reconfigure and relearn. But for you as a human, when you're experiencing this, because it's not just the ROC, it's everywhere and it's all the time. And it's not just you looking at it and saying, well, this sucks and leaving, but you're writing about it. And the process of writing, which we'll get to, but it's so deep and it's so overwhelming at times. It's so personal. You're pulling from your soul at some point. But what are you experiencing? Your emotions. I wanted to ask you this, and I guess we'll get to it, but don't you hate our species at some point? Don't you hate what we've done and who we are? Where do you go emotionally?
Yeah, it's very hard. I've definitely gone through phases of hating the idea of humanity. Um, I think sometimes, well, I think that's, it's kind of unhelpful in that what on earth can I do about it? You know, I am a human. I exist on. I didn't ask to be born a human. This is the way I turned out. Um, One of our contributors, Joanna Pocock, who's a Canadian travel writer, just wrote a beautiful essay. It hasn't actually been published yet, um, but it's about the idea of leaving no trace. So it's from a canoe expedition she did in North America some time ago, and the whole ethos of the canoe trip was leave no trace. We're here. We won't leave a footprint. We'll leave only footprints. All of that stuff. We'll leave no trace of ourselves. And the essay is a really clever unpicking of that idea, which it kind of troubled her, that phrase, and she couldn't quite put her finger on it. And then kind of digging down into it a bit more, um, it sort of it reflects this assumption that humans are necessarily bad and any human trace is a bad thing. And that doesn't look at, the thousands, hundreds of thousands of years that humans have existed on the earth and have left their traces, but in a good way. Um, so it's kind of a call for what if we invert that, what are the good traces we can leave behind? Um, we don't just create destruction. It can be very easy to kind of look around and see that that's all you see. But that's not been the experience of most of humanity, as I understand it, for most of the history of our species. So I think we're not necessarily, terrible parasites. I think there are certain qualities of humanity that are incredibly destructive and incredibly cruel and incredibly thoughtless. I think the culture that we're in now, this globalized Western capitalist culture, call it what you like, is accentuating many of those really bad aspects of humanity, encouraging them, praising them, enabling them, and that's not all we are, though. That's not all we are. I guess there's kind of some hope in that, or some sort of justification for being a human myself.
Why do you turn to art and not destruction when you feel this?
That's a very good question. I can't think of any amount of destruction that would be enough, to overturn what's going on. That is the path that some people choose. Writing's what I've always done. Um, it's been something that I've done since I was a very small child. So I guess in a way it's just kind of I was predisposed perhaps through whatever combination of factors to make art and to write. Um, I think it's a kind of a bit of a cliched phrase. I don't know who said it. I guess a lot of people have probably said it, but don't aim for happiness, aim for meaning. It's very much where I find my meaning, and I find that I like that idea because happiness is such a flimsy construct, and no matter how happy you are, you're only one terrible tragedy away from not being happy again, whether that's a bereavement or the destruction of something you love or just getting really sick. But meaning feels a bit more durable. So I think I've always turned to it, this kind of creation of meaning through the words I write. Um, and that's been the sort of one of my mainstays, as I think it has been for, you know, a lot, if not most of humanity for a very long time. We're an art making species, whether that's painting on cave walls or typing on a laptop. I think it does come from the same thing.
And what is writing to you? Like, Not just like what is it like, whether you're using a pen and paper or a laptop or a typewriter or whatever. Maybe you're writing in your head, and you're creating the perfect word, like several short sentences about writing. Verlin Klinkelkopf, I think. Anyway, what what are you trying to do? Are you trying to express yourself? Are you trying to express what you see? Are you trying to document
Mm.
something? Like, are you doing it for fame? Like, what is the point of writing? Like, I apologize if I'm gonna slippery slope into like the nihilistic, but if we're all doomed, what's the point of the art?
I think for me, it's not. Well, compare it to why I guess some other people write. There's you could write to convince the world of the great truth that you are in possession of. I don't feel like I'm in possession of a great truth. That's not why I write. Um, I think the reason I write is to make it's how I make sense of what's going on. Um, and that might sound very, just like navel gazing. Who wants to read a book of just someone kind of fumbling their way through what they think and how they feel? But I think in that, it hopefully does resonate because other people are making similar journeys themselves. So maybe I'm less a kind of I think my writing I'm not so much like a guide, follow me, I'll show you the way. It's I'm going this way, trying to work things out, trying to work out how to get over that hill. Um, come with me, we'll go together. That's the spirit that I hope that I aim to write with. But yeah, I mean, to be quite honest, I mean it's ultimately pointless if you look at it on a we're doomed kind of level. Um, even just on an individual way, I'm going to die. Is this the best use of my few years on Earth? To sit in front of a laptop thinking, and frequently getting frustrated. I mean, no, it's clearly not. But yeah, so I think it's something that to be honest, I don't think about enough. Um, in the way that most people don't really analyze what they're doing in terms of its kind of ultimate futility. It's a very hard thing to do. Maybe really realizing, okay, this is completely pointless would, force me to radically upend my life in ways that currently I'm not prepared for and would find quite frightening. So I write because it's what I do. It's right because how I make meaning of the world. I write because I think it's important. I do. The All the stuff about AI, which I'm kind of reluctant to even broach because it seems like every podcast and everything is all about some people talking about AI. But the AI writing phenomenon, it's been kind of interesting in making me think like, actually, why do I care about this not being done by humans? Like maybe it doesn't matter. Um, so I've sort of found that I feel very passionately that it does matter, um, that it's replacing this very deep intrinsic art making quality that humans have. Making art, making meaning is I guess some anthropologists and paleontologists would say this is what makes us human, or it's one of the most important things that makes us human, no matter what form of art that is. But it seems very deeply important. Uh, yeah, but I mean, maybe I'm not expecting my writing to change the world, and that's why the thought of the ultimate futility of it doesn't matter as much as someone who might think that they were in sole possession of the truth, and just cannot get people to read it or care enough or cannot express it in the right way. I imagine that would be enough to drive you completely mad.
If I may ask you a personal question. So, if you had something that you knew that you needed to write, you felt it in your soul, but you didn't feel like the world was either ready for it or you didn't feel like people would take it seriously, but you still felt like it was the correct thing to write and it was the thing you needed to write, what would you do?
I mean, I'd write it. I might not show it. I might not try and get it published. I guess writing and publishing are, they intersect, but they are kind of very different things. People still make meaning privately and even secretly. So if it felt like it was an important, I think I wouldn't. I think I write in order to think often. I'm not someone that can really start out with a plan and then fill in the plan. I don't really know what I want to say or why I'm trying to say it often until I get to the end, at which point the whole exercise suddenly turns from being something I'm absolutely obsessed by to something that is just of no interest. It kind of disappears in the wind. Um, and I think so. It's a lot of it is about puzzle solving. I think I approach writing as a puzzle to be put together. When I've solved it, I'm no longer interested. And sometimes it isn't until I've finished the thing that I know if it has any value or not.
Is that the same approach you take to travel? So when left school at 18 to just get lost in the Himalayas, what were you doing? Where did that come from? Was this a conscious decision or was this kind of like a on a different dimension?
I mean, I've always wanted to travel, and I've always found a huge amount of meaning in traveling. Um, and one of the things I've done is travel writing. Is the two things seem to go together very well, traveling and writing. Um, I mean, there's some very sort of obvious metaphors you could make. You start out on a journey, you don't quite know where you're going. You might have a couple of landmarks that you're heading towards, but you don't quite know how you're going to get there. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's writing a book is like embarking on a journey, I think, and I sort of approach it in the same way of being prepared to get a bit lost, which I think is a really important part of writing and traveling. I mean, being lost is really interesting. I think it's one of the things that, people can be deeply scared by and think is a really bad thing. And certainly, kind of culturally or politically, nobody wants to admit. Sorry, that's my dog sneezing. Nobody wants to admit to being lost. It seems like a failure. And again, going back to Dark Mountain, I think a lot of that is about what if we just admit we're lost for a bit and just kind of look around and try and not even work out how we're going to get out of this, but just be where we are for a second and see what comes.
That's really interesting. When you're trying to improve your attention span, being bored
Yeah.
is really healthy. Being bored is just really healthy for your mind in general. Just not doing anything, staring at the wall, just feeling that overwhelming sensation. It's not supposed to be overwhelming, but it is because you're not stimulating your senses. Is the feeling or the being of lost? Is it the same thing? Is it just something that we're fundamentally uncomfortable with because we just it's not that it's not that we're uncomfortable with being lost. We are lost. We're uncomfortable with the reality of it setting in that we're lost. That's kind of like, we all love being in Plato's cave, but as soon as we figure out that there are people behind us casting shadows on the fire, that's when we start freaking out. If you
Yeah.
catch my drift.
Yeah. Yeah. I think especially, I mean, there's a real kind of, and we're so used to this idea of destination as somewhere you've got to get to. And I think it kind of goes hand in hand with this, well, we've got a problem, but we're heading towards the solution. Um, so much in our language and culture is about, not stopping, carrying on, you know, muddling on through, striving, seeking whatever's around the corner. Uh, I think it permeates the way we think. There's another contributor to Dark Mountain who's submitted various things over the years, who's an Indian writer who goes by the name of Narendra, and he has spent decades in a region called Bastar, which is the tribal people of India, um, who are facing all kinds of threats and are sort of right at the bottom of the caste system or sort of beyond the caste system. um, and he's lived with them a long time. And a lot of his writing is about him as an urban Indian man trying to get his head round how differently people in that region think. The thing that I always remember when I think of his writing, he describes being in a village, and he goes into a very simple shop, and doors open, and there's a man in there who's just kind of sitting on the floor, not really doing much. And he says to the man, you know, is this your shop? I think he wants to buy something. And the man says no. And Narendra says, well, um, why are you here? What are you doing? And the man just kind of says, I'm just here. I'm not I'm just sitting here. And Narendra's like, but why have you come in? And like, how long are you going to be here for? You know, and what are you doing? And there's a complete sort of mutual incomprehension that this man just doesn't understand what the question is. And this obviously has kind of led these people to be painted as shiftless, lazy, you know, purposeless, aimless people. But it was just a little glimpse into this kind of radically different way of understanding the world and of understanding time and understanding purpose. You know, it was a description of someone who is just kind of existing and is saying, well, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just existing. And I found it kind of almost impossible to really get my head around what that would mean, what it would feel like, how it would change your attitude to the world.
I love that. I love that. I can immediately connect with that without fully understanding it, which
Mm.
is the beauty of being ignorant. Um, well, one of the things that I believe that art is the solution, but just for a different reason. Because to be creative, to use an analogous term, to be creative is to be present. And to be present means you're not worrying about what happened in the past and you're not worrying about where this is going in the future. I think the greatest pieces of art I've ever created are things where I was just present with what I was doing and I didn't know where it was going. But I knew where I needed to kind of
Yeah.
get off the highway, so to speak. And, you know, it would be a real change in education and whatever we're doing right now. But I think if people were to just be and sit with that and learn to not worry about where they're going and, you know, making $70 million by the time they're 25 and hustling and grinding and all of that, I think we would be a much happier species. I think that there is a fundamental disconnect into what we are becoming and what we were. And I don't know kind of where we again got off the
Mm.
highway. And so yeah, no, there's hope beyond hope, but I don't know what that hope is.
Yeah. Hope beyond hope. Exactly. That's what I feel as well. And it can sound incredibly vague, you know, and unsatisfying to people to talk in those terms. But it's what I feel as well. I think objectively, you know, you look around, we've just had the record breaking heat for May, you know, another record that's been broken. It felt like being in the south of France for 2 days in May when it should be cool. Um, you know, I'm not even going to try and mention all the stuff in the news that is terrifying and awful and hopeless and feels like it's just getting worse with no end in sight. And despite that, I would say that I'm quite a hopeful person, but I don't know why, you know. And if I really analyze it, I can't find any reasons really to be hopeful. But there is a sense of, I mean, maybe that, I think it was Gary Snyder, I think it was him, might be wrong, uh, just had a very simple thing about like, we came to a fork in the road and we took the wrong way, which sounds kind of hopeless, but at least you can think, well, there was a fork in the road, you know, there was a possibility of going the other way, and maybe there will be another fork and we won't go the wrong way. or we can kind of go back in some sense to that original fork and kind of try again, see if we can get a different result that time. I mean, it's one of the reasons professionally, I'm kind of steeped in nonfiction, travel, nature writing. But one of my great passions increasingly is speculative writing, science fiction, fantasy. And I've started teaching that form of writing now, despite having never published a book that could be called sci-fi or fantasy. But it always amazes me that the people that come to that, I think, the reason it's powerful, the reason it's important is just that idea that you can imagine something different. It could be worse, it could be better. But I think there's a kind of powerful act in just it's like it cracks reality open a little bit and you look through and realize that the way things are was never inevitable. It seems that way now, but it was never inevitable. We were never definitely going to end up at the state we are now, and therefore the future is not inevitable, and it's changeable. And I think, yeah, there's a sort of a great sense of hope actually in that, in just allowing the imagination to do its work, to kind of do what it's always done.
I'd usually have a question towards the end of the podcast, which is if you had a magic wand and can solve one problem in the world, what would it be and why? I'm not going to ask you that for a variety of reasons, but mostly because it doesn't make any sense and it's not what we're talking about. I don't think that there is a magic wand. I don't think there should be a magic wand. And even if there were, even if there was one, I don't think that we should wave it, because going back to your fork in the road analogy, I think it's really important that we took the wrong route because we needed to see how bad things turn out in order to never do it again. If we are given that chance, I think that if everything is peachy all the time, then we're being very ignorant to ourselves. The best relationships that you can have are the ones where you've gone through hell and come out and become stronger. Every single time my girlfriend and I fight, we become stronger. Every single time, because we want the best for each other, because we want to be with each other, not be as in lowercase b, but capital B. And so civilizationally, I think it's really important that we got our amygdalas in check. So instead of asking you the magic wand question, I will ask you, if you could go back in the past or in the future and talk to yourself and say a couple of things, where would you go? What point in the past or future would you go, and what would you say?
I think I'd go forward. Um, yeah, I'd go into the future. I'd just like to say to my future self, well done for getting this far. You know, well done for getting through all of it. And I hope it brought a lot of beauty on the way. I mean, I'm not sure I'd have great advice, or kind of advice that would change, whatever temporal state I was in at that time. Um, but yeah, I don't think I'd go back because, again, I think, like you were saying, you kind of I wouldn't change anything or anything big, because everything you've struggled with, that who hasn't kind of wish I could go 1 hour back in time and not do that thing or not say that thing or choose that thing or not say no to that thing. But each of those things has been it's made me who I am, and I'm happy enough with that.
Nick, you are a beautiful soul. Thank you so much for coming on this program. Where can we follow your work? Where can we keep up to date with you?
Oh, thank you. It's been really, yeah, lovely conversation. And you're a beautiful soul also. Nice to meet you in this medium. Maybe one day our paths will cross in real life. So I'm talking of this medium. Of course, I'm on, find me on the internet. I've got a website, nickhuntscrutiny.com, and that's got stuff I write and details of my books. Buy physical copies of my books if you possibly can. They should be in bookshops. And there's another one, the one that contains this journey to the Aral Sea and other journeys into sort of disappearing, vanishing landscapes, that comes out in July 27. Oh no, sorry, earlier, March 27. And at the moment it's titled Ways to Say Goodbye. So yeah, do pick up a copy if you can. And also check out the Dark Mountain Project. You can find that easily. Subscribe, share, contribute. We'd love to hear from you.
All those links will be in the show notes, and I hope you can come back on the program anytime to further this discussion. I think we went into really interesting places, but there's also a lot of things left unsaid, which is always the beautiful part of conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. May we all be lost in interesting ways.
Cheers to being lost. Thank you, Nick.
All right, thanks, Aish.